Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some big news coming out for the South Carolina Gamecock fans as Jared Brown, former Coastal Carolina wide receiver, commits to the South Carolina Gamecocks. And if you've been a long-time listener, we went back 3 weeks ago and talked about some transfer portal targets for the South Carolina Gamecocks. And the wide receiver position was one of those spots that we said could get improved from a depth standpoint, from a talent standpoint. Heading into 2024, South Carolina going out and getting a wide receiver that extremely dynamic, especially with the football in his hands. Want to get into Jared Brown, what he's going to bring to this South Carolina offense, and then talk about a few other transfer portal targets for the South Carolina Gamecocks that they had on campus this weekend. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. And as many of you know, trying to cover as many of the transfer portal additions as I can. South Carolina obviously making a big splash today. If y'all do enjoy the content, enjoy the updates, consider subscribing to the channel. And for South Carolina fans, it sounds like Shane Beamer is going to be quite aggressive in the transfer portal heading into 2024, getting this roster right. So I'll try to keep you guys as updated as possible. Without further ado, let's get into Jared Brown. And you look at the South Carolina wide receiver room, and it was really unbalanced. And obviously, Juice Wells not really being able to go with the injury played a large role in that. But outside of Xavier Legette, the wide receiver position was just not really making plays. I mean, Nick Harbor was a true freshman who was making the move from defensive end in high school to playing that wide receiver spot. And that's not really where you want to be as a South Carolina program, playing in the SEC, relying on true freshman wide receivers to really make some plays. And outside of that, I mean, you had Trey Knox that did some good things. I think most South Carolina fans know that the wide receiver position just was lacking some playmaking ability. And most importantly, I think it was lacking some playmakers in terms of having the football in their hands. Not a lot of yards after the catch for South Carolina, again, outside of a guy like Xavier Legette. Not a lot of playmakers in this wide receiver room. And I think the thing I love most about Jared Brown is not only has he been extremely productive the last 2 years, 107 catches, over 1,500 yards and 10 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons with Coastal Carolina. Digging into it a little bit, 1,100 of those yards came after the catch. And you turn on some of the tape for Jared Brown, he's a guy that they're just trying to get the football into his hands any way possible. He also had 35 carries for 439 yards the last 2 years, a lot of screens, a lot of stuff underneath, and letting Jared Brown kind of make some things happen after the catch. And we get so caught up with hitting the explosive play at the college football level. And yes, it's extremely important. I think a lot of people think that the only time you can hit explosive plays is when you're chucking the football down the field, 30 plus yards. You can hit explosive plays by getting your wide receivers and playmakers the football in space and letting them do work after the catch. And Jared Brown, that's kind of his game. And I was looking up some of the South Carolina receiving numbers, and they didn't have a single wide receiver outside of Xavier Legette go over 250 yards in terms of after the catch receiving yards. Jared Brown coming in the last 2 years with 1,100 of those yards coming after the catch. That's what I like most about this edition is you're getting a guy that is going to make a quarterback's life a little bit more easy, because guess what? We're just going to get Jared Brown the football in space, and he's going to make some plays. He has some absolute jets to hit the big play. He has a really good shake in terms of making people miss. That's kind of how I see them using Jared Brown. And another guy that they're targeting and is trending to South Carolina in a very similar conversation is Jayden McGaw coming from Vanderbilt. And this is another guy that you look at the numbers. 80 catches for 836 yards and 3 touchdowns the last 2 years at Vanderbilt. You look at the yards after the catch, 668 of those yards came after the catch for a guy like Jayden McGowan. Very good with the football in his hands. Also a guy that they'll give some carries to, some end arounds to, a lot of screen passes to. I think Shane Beamer looked at this offense and said, yeah, we had Xavier Legette who could go after the catch, but he was really thriving when he was working vertically down the field, using that size and that long speed. But outside of that, I mean, there weren't many guys that were threats with the football in their hands, especially as Juice Wells wasn't healthy. A guy like Jared Brown, a guy like Jayden McGawan, who also boasts a 10.61 on the 100-meter track and field time. Those are guys that you can get the football to in space and go let them work after the catch, which is such an important aspect of being a wide receiver and having an offense that can hit explosive plays, is having guys who are good with the football in their hands. Jared Brown, a nice commitment. If you can get Jayden McGawan in the boat as well, you're suddenly starting to feel pretty good about having some weapons on the outside. And obviously, a guy like Nick Harbor is just going to continue to progress as a wide receiver at the college football level again. When he was in high school, he played a little bit of a tight end spot, but a lot of times he was playing on defense as well. So Nick Harbor making that progression, adding a guy like Jared Brown, potentially adding a guy like Jayden McGaw would make a ton of sense. Now, the next couple of guys I want to talk about who were on campus, we obviously got to talk about Rocket Sanders, who 24/7 Sports has him as the number 3 running back in the transfer portal. I'll tell you this, I don't know if I'm taking any other running backs than Rocket Sanders out of the transfer portal. A healthy Rocket Sanders is not only one of the best running backs in the SEC conference, but in the entire country. He was on campus for South Carolina. Now, I think a lot of South Carolina fans were upset that you didn't get a commitment out of the visit weekend. Rocket Sanders and another guy that we'll talk about, those are going to be dudes that, I mean, they're getting a lot of interest. And so they're going to kind of see what else is out there in terms of schools and their offers that they have for them. And that, I don't think Rocket Sanders not committing out of the weekend is, oh, yep, South Carolina lost on that one. It's more, yeah, Rocket Sanders, his phone's blown up since he's hit the transfer portal. So he's going to hear what other teams have to say. He's going to go take a look at what else is out there. But the fact that you got the first visit from Rocket Sanders in a position that, I mean, if Rocket Sanders comes in, he's getting almost 300 carries if he stays healthy in the 2024 year, a position where they desperately need talent with Mario Anderson leaving in the transfer portal. I still like where South Carolina could be standing there. I don't think it's time to panic because Rocket Sanders didn't commit after taking his visit this weekend in South Carolina. Another guy I want to talk about that is a very similar boat is LT Overton, right? Former 5-star from that 2022 class. He's another guy that hits the transfer portal, the phone blows up. But the fact that LT Overton, Rocket Sanders are guys that took their first visit to South Carolina, I think says a lot about their interest in the program. Almost every Power 5 team in the country is going to want Rocket Sanders or LT Overton. And the fact that they're taking a look at South Carolina first, I think sends a really good message. So Rocket Sanders, LT Overton, they might be committing in the next couple of days, but I wouldn't be surprised if they take some other visits, see what some other coaches and programs have to say. But I wouldn't be losing faith about Rocket Sanders and LT Overton. And the last guy I want to talk about that it sounds like maybe a commitment coming soon is big Jerome Simmons. Now, I haven't brushed his tape yet from the JUCO levels, but you see the rankings. One of the more coveted defensive linemen coming from that JUCO class. And what have we talked about for South Carolina heading into this year? We want some big bodies on the inside of that defensive line. And I'd say 6'4", 330 pounds certainly qualifies as a big body. If he comes and joins the class, you're feeling pretty good about how that inside of that defensive line is looking, especially guys like on the edge coming in, Dylan Stewart coming in that 2024 class. So Jerome Simmons, probably the guy that I'm looking out for next for South Carolina, or Jayden McGaw. But you're feeling pretty good. And again, going back to a guy like Jared Brown, I feel like this will be an underrated pickup in terms of there are some flashier wide receivers that are in the transfer portal. But in terms of what South Carolina needs and what they want in their wide receivers, guys who can be explosive with the football in their hands, I think Jared Brown is a really good get. And Jayden McGaw, you could say a lot of the same things for. You have some talent in that wide receiver room, but it's young and it's inexperienced. And the best way to supplement that is get guys who have proven production at the college football level. A guy like Jared Brown, Jayden McGaw certainly would go far in that. Wanted to hop on, talk a little bit about Jared Brown. I've seen some Coastal Carolina games. He is an electric playmaker. Really excited to see what he looks like in the South Carolina offense. Again, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.